And I'm delighted, and thank you so much for asking me along to do this talk and presentation tonight. This is a slight change of the plan for the original one that I was doing the talk, but hopefully you will find it just as interesting. And everybody who's here at the moment, we're going to talk about past lives, a little bit about maybe children with spontaneous past lives, but mostly about hypnotic past lives. And it'd just be nice for people at the moment to put the thought in their head, whether they're on the believer side, skeptical side, or somewhere in between. And after this presentation, I give it be really interesting to know whether you've changed your mind at all. I always think it's important to keep an open mind, and if you're a believer, to allow a little bit of skepticism, and if you are skeptic, just to be open to the believing side as well. I think that's very important. Now, this is a talk that I have done before when I talk about my beginnings, and I got into hypnosis because at school I was always kind of thought to myself as more of a Charlie sort of Brown character. But in the end, it can be quite a compelling thing to be, because as you'll see by the very end of it, that this being somebody who you see as an underdog can be your strength. I was always interested in hypnosis as I was growing up through my childhood, and I actually tried to hypnotize some people when I was at school. And when I was at school trying to hypnotize some of the school children, I didn't actually know how to do it properly, because you weren't told at school or anywhere like on the internet, because you can go on YouTube, how to hypnotize people. I just kind of had a vague sort of idea. It didn't really work, but because of my low self-esteem, I kind of thought that it would be quite fun to see if I can get children, my class friends, to do some stuff which were amusing. I'm a completely and utterly, totally different character to that now. You might have seen this quick slide that comes. I'm going to talk about Dr. Ian Stevenson, who went around the world investigating children with spontaneous past lives a little later on. It was particularly Paul McKenna cassettes, Sensational Snooker, which I still actually have this cassette. I haven't listened to it a very long time, so that will be very obvious if you play snooker with me. But this was the first time I actually was hypnotized myself, and it was the first time I realized that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So the fact that somebody is a hypnotist doesn't mean they have control over anybody. It's like dancing, it's pacing and leading, and you help guide the client, or in this case, Paul McKenna, help guide me into that deep state of relaxation. And for any reason you to open your eyes during hypnosis, you can just simply open up your eyes and you'll be refreshed and feeling completely calm, confident, and be happy that you've been through the experience. And also as well, when we talk about past lives, nobody ever feels like they're ever transported back into that life. They're always aware that they're themselves. They're always aware of the surroundings around themselves. And I'm trying. Oh, there we go. So there's different interpretations. We saw Dr. Ian Stevenson. Now I conduct hypnosis with clients in front of me, and I did have a list and a slideshow of different hypnotherapy sessions that I've done online and in person I could show people, but I couldn't really find any way of sharing the sound. But if you go to Past Life Regressions with Paul Goddard, my YouTube channel, you'll see lots of live and pre-recorded demonstrations. So some of them can be quite compelling, some less compelling. And I always like to think of this criteria, which is why I said about believer or skeptic, in Stevenson's criteria, interpretations for non-paranormal interpretations, which I think is right, because I did go on quite a bit, so I have got it right. So is it fraud? Ian Stevenson looked into, because he went around the world investigating children with spontaneous past life claims, he looked into whether it could be fraud. Were the children making it up, or were the parents making it up as well? That was one of the questions he was asking himself. Could it be fantasy? Now, I know that a lot of people that have past lives, after the experience, whether it was a real event or fantasy, they are in a stuck state, and it helps them to reach desired state after having hypnotic past life regression. So even if it's just the mind making it up, it is very beneficial to people as well. So Ian Stevenson thought, could it be fantasy? I'll move these a little more quicker and then I'll go through it individually afterwards. So we've got cryptomnesia, which is a source amnesia, paranesia, which is crediting the subject with more knowledge than thought previously had, she knew, or could it be genetic memory? Now, I thought that I would take each one of these in turn. Now, fraud. We all know that the paranormal field is definitely open to fraud. So Ian Stevenson, as I said, found very little about this with his findings and when he went around the world investigating these children with spontaneous past life claims. And I also share his findings because although you do see some of the regressions that are volunteers that go onto my YouTube channel, for every person that goes onto my YouTube channel, there are many, many more that come to me privately and pay me some money. Now, some of the regressions are quite compelling, some less so. And for me, it doesn't make any sense, particularly the people that come to me on a one-to-one basis, why they would come to make something up, to pay me, and for it to go no further, because I find a lot of the people that come to see me are curious about past lives. Some use it for healing, and others are just totally curious. And they don't want their close friends or family to see. In fact, some are even a little bit worried about looking back at the footage themselves. Even though they've enjoyed the process, they're a little bit worried. And I want to talk about hypnosis and fraud because there is a lot of misconceived ideas about hypnosis. I think programs like The Avengers certainly don't help. You know, the old Avengers that I used to absolutely love and still enjoy watching now, where somebody would be hypnotized. The person would then go off that was hypnotized like a zombie and they would assassinate someone. That's not what hypnosis is about. You certainly never go into a zombie state at all. And everybody has their own personal ethical code, so you cannot break that code whatsoever. But there has been a lot of people in the scientific community and doctors over the years that have added to the thought that possibility hypnosis could be fraud. Now, this is Abbe Ferreira. Now, Abbe Ferreira was from Panaji in Goa. He was actually involved in religion before he became interested in the scientific study of hypnotism. And he was getting quite a good reputation. He was known to also be quite a showman. And he would demonstrate to lots of different people. And when he was in Paris demonstrating, because he moved from Goa to Paris for a while, demonstrating the power of hypnosis and how it could potentially heal people, some of the doctors were getting very jealous of his fame and the success he was having. So some of these doctors, unfortunately, decided to pay some people to go into one of Ferreira's hypnosis shows. From this point, at a given point, when Ferreira had his volunteers, which were these people who didn't realize had been paid by these doctors under hypnosis, at a given point, they came out of their hypnosis they were pretending to be in and said that Ferreira was a fraud and that Ferreira had actually paid them to just sham going into hypnosis, which was a real shame because Ferreira was actually one of the first people that said that hypnosis was actually indeed self-hypnosis. And from this, what I feel was just back from the doctors, the hypnosis field went back into the background, wasn't really thought for many years and wasn't taken seriously for many years. But fortunately, in Panaji in Goa, you can see here on the town logo that he has indeed been added to the logo. It's the man there with the hypnotized subject underneath him. So at least although he wasn't recognized in his lifetime, because after this despicable act by these doctors, he went back into obscurity. But at least Goa and Panaji now recognize his contribution to hypnosis. Now, could what people are getting under hypnosis, and if you haven't seen one of my regressions, you may have seen other people's regressions, could it be fantasy? There is an excellent book. So if anybody is truly into hypnosis, there is the Art of Hypnosis series by Roy Hunter and some other people. And this goes into hypnosis being an art form rather than it's being a science. And I like to think of the way I conduct hypnosis more as an art form than a scientific study. But he goes into this book, Roy Hunter, about the true necessity to make sure you guide a client rather than lead a client. Now, what do I mean by guiding rather than leading? Roy, when he was a child, he was bitten by a scorpion. And he had what was very much to him a near-death experience. He was put under hypnosis later to find out more information about this potential near-death experience. But for now, I'll explain Roy's journey into that hypnotic experience to begin with and what happened initially with the scorpion sting. When Roy was a child, he lived in the sticks, basically, of America. And when he was stung by this scorpion, the nearest doctor was miles away, so his parents couldn't take him or a doctor couldn't come to see him. So instructions were given to Roy Hunter, who is a hypnotherapist now, but when he was a child, his parents needed to get this doctor. That night, he woke up in tremendous pain and he suddenly felt his breathing really struggling and he felt himself rising up from the bed. He tried to call out to his sister because his sister was in the room just across from where he was. And he couldn't make any sound. And he was so frightened, saw a very bright white light. And then he called out in his mind to God that he was too young to die. From this moment, Roy suddenly felt himself fall back down on the bed. He was able to breathe again. And he then called out to his sister, who thought, oh, Roy's just having a nightmare there. But years later, Roy Hunter met another hypnotist. Now, although Roy is a qualified hypnotherapist, he's someone like myself that always feels that you can learn from others, enjoys the hypnotic experience, and also feels like myself that sometimes having another hypnotist guide you into a regression is the best way of doing things. But this is why it's important to guide rather than lead, because this hypnotist that Roy went to see to have this regression was very much into the UFO phenomena. So when Roy was on the bed and suddenly felt himself rising up and saw the light, this hypnotist Roy said, go through the light and let me know if there's a UFO there. Now, when somebody is in hypnosis, there is a strong level of rapport that is built up between the person going into hypnosis and the hypnotist giving the instructions. And that's why hypnosis is pacing and leading. So the client is following the hypnotist lead. Because there was that level of rapport and Roy was in deep hypnosis, Roy did see the UFO once he went through the light. She then proceeded and just leave it there, say, do you see grey, small beings with black slanting eyes? And again, Roy did see that experience and have that, and had what is more like a classic abduction experience. I'll move on from that. Now, with Roy having that experience, he thought he would then go later on to have another regression with a hypnotherapist that just guided rather than led. So instead of asking specific questions like that, the questions that would be asked were things like, allow yourself to go forward in time just a little bit. What's happening now? And because there was no implanted suggestions in there, Roy had more of a classic near-death experience where he saw the angel of death. Whether that still was the reality or whether it was his mind, but you're making sure that you are really in that time making sure that the person has minimized the amount of misleading information that might come up, even though sometimes people might say stuff in hypnosis because it's their own belief system. And I just thought as well that I'd share a few of the experiences that I've had with people that they've said to me that they've gone back and researched and they found out that they were this particular person. So there's only just a few people that are here that are happy for me to share the experiences. So there's Elizabeth Knight, Sarah Jane Anderson, and it was very compelling. But then also as well, I've had somebody in hypnosis. They were saying about the work they were doing, working on the canal with their husband. It was a very hard life, but very enjoyable. And when I asked their names, they replied to me, the lady replied to me, Rosie and Jim. And at that moment, my face just fell. However, that doesn't mean there wasn't actually a Rosie and Jim working the canal. In fact, there probably were several Rosie and Jims working the canal. So it's up to you what you feel at that point. So now we're sort of, just before I move on from that, somebody I was talking to on the live said that, funny enough, they live next door to a Barbie and Ken. So things like that do happen. Cryptonesia. Now, I did have, but I can't play the sounds on this, unfortunately, but I will explain it afterwards. Cryptonesia, which is source amnesia. And this is B.F. Skinner, psychologist. And he said one of the most disheartening experiences of old age is that discovering that a point that you had just made so significantly, so beautifully expressed, was made by you in something you published long ago. There's a concept in psychology called cryptonesia, which is when you think you've come up with something brand new, with a brand new idea, of your own, when in fact it can be shown that you encountered that idea before. So perhaps what people are experiencing in hypnosis is something called cryptonesia. And perhaps that when somebody's in a hypnosis, they're remembering times when they've watched television and the information that's going in there, storing itself in the subconscious. Other times, what could potentially be happening as well is when you've been at school or read in a book. Now, whenever I conduct a past life regression session, I make sure that when I speak to the client beforehand, I just allow their subconscious mind to go to what might be a potential past life. I have seen other hypnotists say on YouTube when I've watched others, because I also think you can learn from watching others, people have said right at the beginning of the session, what you will come up in this past life regression, you would have not heard at school, you would have not seen on TV, you would have not read in a book, you would have not heard about in the news. Now, if I told people not to think of a dog right now, anything else but a dog, just don't think how a dog wags its tail, you're going to start thinking about a dog. So I think, and I believe the people I've seen that have said this line at the beginning aren't deliberately implanting the suggestions, but I know how the mind works and sometimes doesn't hear the not word and just focuses on what you shouldn't focus on. So that's why I leave this out when I do my regressions. Now, I did have a clip from a YouTube channel, but there is various music that has been in the past, like My Sweet Lord, very similar to another tune called He's So Fine. And it was discovered that, when it did go to court, because and I've forgotten his name off the top of my head, but the Beatle that went, and when he went solo, when he wrote the tune, the judge did believe that it was a case of cryptonesia, but because the tune was copied, then the fine was needed to be paid. I'll remember his name in a second, so I do apologise for that. But there are countless, if you look over the internet, books written that are very similar to other books, music produced, which is very similar to music produced, several years before, maybe even decades before. So it's not that the people are deliberately creating plagiarism. George Harrison, that's the name. Apologies for that. Not that they're deliberately creating plagiarism, but that this information has gone into the subconscious, and at a later stage they're regurgitating the music or story or what they've heard before. And perhaps in hypnosis, this is what's happening. You're creating a compelling story from what you've already seen or heard or read about before. So paramnesia. So you won't be able to hear the sound on this at all, unfortunately. But I'm going to stop playing. But I'll take his headphones out because I can hear it talking about. This is a Channel 4 documentary from some years ago, and they created a fake flying saucer to see whether what was being flown over Avebury near the Red Lion pub, whether the public would be fooled in thinking that it was a genuine flying saucer. And what is really interesting about this, which at some distance does look very convincing, is that each person that went to see this had a different experience. But what is really interesting as well is that different experience, although they all saw the same thing, when asked about it, some people would say there were two of them up in the sky. Other people said that it was being camouflaged at certain points. The sizes were different between each of the different people. And each of the people afterwards were absolutely convinced that what they saw was the real thing. So with creating more evidence in the past life, or maybe past life that the child is experiencing, over time, memory isn't 100% foolproof. Perhaps people adding more into what their regression experience is, or the child that experienced the spontaneous past life, when they're talking about where they came before coming into this body. So that's why I make sure when I do my regressions that I record it so that people can watch the regressions back afterwards. This is a really interesting one. Now I can get my headphones back in, is genetic memory. This is a completely fascinating angle. There, perhaps instead of people going into hypnosis and either having all what we've heard before or later on saying genuinely paranormal, perhaps what they are experiencing is something called genetic memory. So that's the idea that the genes go through the cells, because each of the cells has cellular receptors. So perhaps that some of this genetic memory is from that. Now, there is an interesting book, Paul Purcell's The Heart's Code. In that, there are various really interesting cases. One of them, a lady received the heart and lungs of a mountain climber. This lady, before she received the heart and lungs, was absolutely terrified of heights, but when receiving the heart and lungs, she lost her fear of heights. She received the heart and lungs of a mountain climber, and she actually began to become a mountain climber herself. So that was a positive benefit for her. There was a young early teen, sorry, not early teen, in her 18, sorry, lady who received the heart from a child who passed away. And once receiving this heart, she became very poetic and started creating songs. The person whose heart it was originally, a teenage boy, and he used to like creating songs himself. In fact, one of the music that he created on one of the cassettes was played to the lady who received the donor, and she was able to finish off some of the phrases, even though she had never heard them before. And more closer to me, a really good friend of mine, his uncle needed to have a liver transplant. And when his uncle received the transplant, his personality changed, where at one point he would throw any clothes on. He became quite fussy, liked his clothes to be matching and looking good. In fact, the very first inkling that his personality had potentially changed is when his wife brought his pajamas in and the pajamas weren't matching. Now, my friend Owen, his uncle, had been, yeah, well, they just keep you warm at night, doesn't matter if they're matching. He was really upset about this and actually became quite tearful. So, potentially, what people are experiencing and can get more of in hypnosis is cell memory. So we'll have a look at Ian Stevenson's possible paranormal interpretations, which are extrasensory perception, possession, and finally, could it be reincarnation? So I have got one of the Zener cards up, which I will show for the extrasensory perception. So it'd just be really interesting, and there's no real way of asking people what they feel it's going to be, but I will find out afterwards, see what people think it is. I will trust everybody with this one. So if you just give a few moments to think what the card that I might be showing next will be. So just a few moments with that screenshot on there, and then I'll show the card and just be interesting to know what people think it was. So it was some wavy lines, so just be interesting to see if people picked up on that. Of course, there's going to be the possibility of it being guesswork, but if there's the majority of people think that it's wavy lines, it'd be more interesting, or is it the card that most people usually go for? So perhaps when people are in hypnosis, is some form of extrasensory perception. And maybe these children, when they're young, they're picking up on a potential deceased person through extrasensory perception. So possession, this is something that Ian Stevenson looked into. Could the child be possessed? Now, with hypnosis, no one is ever possessed whilst being in hypnosis, but perhaps there's some form of channeling going on. It's an interesting subject, and I do have the most, and I have got some sound of it, but you won't be able to hear it there. But if you go on YouTube, you can look up the sound. This is the Enfield poltergeist, and Janet was allegedly possessed. There are recordings available of it. So we do know that there is at least stories of children being possessed. Now, I'm going to talk about one of my cases, and I realized as well, because I've got to do 45 minutes to an hour, you haven't been able to see some of the clips that have been in there. So I'm going to add in another interesting reincarnation story from a child and also someone else as well for you. So this is Steve Mulligan. Steve Mulligan is part of the Paradox Club. It's a YouTube group where they investigate and also allow the people to share their paranormal experiences. Now, it is an interesting regression that I did. This was live on his channel, and it's also on my YouTube channel, Past Life Regressions with Paul Goddard. Steve always felt a deep connection with Llandudno. And when he would go to Llandudno on a family holiday, his parents would need to get him from A to B, or the family from A to B. And Steve would say, it's all right, I can take you to this destination. And his parents would always say to him, well, how on earth do you know that? So he always found that he could find his way around Bay easily. Under hypnosis, Steve said that he was this man, Sidney Sutcliffe, which indeed could be found on the internet. Sidney Sutcliffe was a lieutenant in the Flying Corps, and he was shot down over Cambrai in France in the First World War. There is certain information about Sidney Sutcliffe's life, so I won't play the progression now because. Sorry, I've just got to go back because that. Start the slides again. Sorry about this. I keep going now, but I'm having a bit of trouble with this computer at the moment. From current slide. Here we go. So Steve said in the regression that he had a father. Stage name was Abraham, and his real name was Arthur Sutcliffe. And he said that his father worked on the railways, which indeed his father did, and that his father also performed entertainment shows in Llandudno and also up and down the country. I asked some of the acts that his father did on the stage. Being dressed as a clown was one of them. Being in a sailor suit was another. And some of the things that Steve said in his regression about the acts that his father did, we could find out online. However, Steve did also mention some other interesting points during the regression. Said that when his father was away traveling, he would come back with a toy, like a mouth organ or some little puppets for the children that they could play. There wasn't, as far as I know, any record of this that could be found. Steve did actually say that his mother, that his father called Rose, so Sidney Sutcliffe this is now, not Steve, so Sidney, if he was talking in regression, said that his mother, Rose, would sometimes be involved in the acts on stage. That can't be found out either. Also, as well, another thing which Steve did mention, that his father did grow a moustache for a while, and that none of the family thought that it suited him, and they would all have a laugh because bits of food would get stuck in the moustache. Again, that can't be found on stage, can't be found online. So all little bits of information that we couldn't get online that Steve said who he was, this Sidney Sutcliffe character. We wanted to see if we could find any family, obviously with sensitivity because Sidney Sutcliffe had passed away in tragic circumstances, but I sent a press release out to the North Wales Post to see if anybody from the family knew of this little bit of information. Unfortunately, nobody did come forward with it. But those are the sorts of things that would be incredibly compelling, because from somebody on the skeptical point of view would say that Steve knew about this before. Now, I know Steve well, and I know him a lot more since doing the regression, and I know him to be a very honest person. If you watch his YouTube channel, sorry, not YouTube channel, his Facebook page group with his girlfriend Sharon, you'll see through the investigations that not an awful lot happens in them. So it's not like, and I wouldn't say anybody's particularly doing anything, but there is the rumors of some YouTube channels maybe emphasizing some of the paranormal activity. I certainly know that that Steve and his girlfriend Sharon aren't people like that. But skeptically, you could say perhaps in the past he has read about Sidney, maybe as a child, and completely forgot about it consciously, but under hypnosis, remembering it. Or is it real reincarnation? So that's why we wanted to see if any family members knew any information. Unfortunately, nobody actually came forward, but those little bits and pieces of information that would be really useful for us. Now, what is interesting as well and very good is that Steve and his girlfriend Sharon, they visited Llandudno because they were really fascinated to see whether they could find more information about Sidney Sutcliffe and his family. Steve said he grew up in a house called The Nook, which that could be found online. Sharon was driving. They had the sat nav trying to get to the house called The Nook in Llandudno. And at one point during the drive, Steve says, we've got to turn left here. And Sharon says, no, 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 we keep going straight on. So they did. And sat nav took them quite a long way around. They ended up going back to where they were nearby. But if they had both listened to what Steve had said, then when he said to turn, it would have taken them directly to the house. So, some of my regressions are more compelling, like this particular one. If you're interested in finding out more information about this, you can go on the YouTube channel, Past Life Regressions with Paul Goddard, or you can put Steve Mulligan, Past Life, and into Google, and you'll see the North Vale Post. It also got in the Mirror this story because it was quite an interesting, compelling one. So that are all the different things so far. So I've mentioned a little bit about Dr. Ian Stevenson, who went round the world investigating children with past life claims. And spontaneously, so as soon as they can talk, they will say things like, when I was here, I live next to the sea. You're not my mother. I want to go to my real mother. This house is too small. My house is much bigger, etc. Those sorts of things. And there is a story by a child who's called Edward Austin. And Edward was a child that was very terrified of the night, stormy weather. And he would often point to his throat and say, my shot. And he would keep doing this. And this was just around the stage when he was just beginning to properly communicate and speak. The parents just thought that he pointed to his throat and called it my shot because it really hurt. So going to the doctor, which his father was also a doctor, but they took Edward to the family doctor. They noticed that there was a cyst on his throat that could potentially turn cancerous later on. So they thought that it would be an idea to remove this cyst. Now, there were two parts of the operation. The first part of the operation was to remove the tonsils to make it easier. Then later on, he was going to have a second operation to remove the cyst. When he had the first part of the operation, when he was coming out of the anaesthetic, he told his mother, who was buying this very unusual and interesting story, said, my name was James, I was 18 years old, and I'm in France. My rifle is heavy, it's cold, it's damp, my feet ache. I heard a shot from behind me. It went through someone else and hit me square in the back of the neck, and I felt my throat fill with blood. And that was quite a shocking tale for such a young child to say to his mother when the child was more interested in watching the usual children's programs that were on TV at that time. But really interesting is later on when he was due to have the second part of the operation, sometime later, they realized that this cyst that was in his throat had been removed somehow, even though it hadn't been removed surgically. So it disappeared. So I often say to people, maybe it was holding something back from a past life that once he released it verbally, he was able to let it go in himself and heal himself. So I always make sure, when I have people, that I am a client-centered hypnotherapist. It can be very healing having hypnosis, but also as well, I think it's incredibly important that you go along with the client's beliefs. If a client comes to me and believes that they had a past life and it will help them in some way, I will certainly guide them through a past life regression. If I have someone, whoever, who really doesn't believe that at all, I certainly would not take anybody down that route, because it's not fair to impose something on somebody else that could potentially be offensive to them. I've had other regressions as well, and what is really interesting, I was hoping to play some clips of how somebody sounded to begin with and how they sounded during the hypnosis, because sometimes people's entire voice changes and they start speaking with an accent. I have never come across at any point somebody who has spoken in another language, at least a language that they claimed to me they didn't understand. But, you know, that may well happen at some point in the future. It can be quite different, each person's regression. I do take people through to death experience because I think it's important for somebody to experience what potentially might be an entire life for them. Each person is different and they will experience things in different ways. But one of the things I do find particularly interesting, just of note, is that not many people during the moment they're passing will experience a bright light, which is what I would imagine most people would experience. Some do, but most don't seem to. The majority of them seem to be on where they are. So if they're dying in bed, lifting up from the bed, and they then feel themselves pass over. And quite a lot of them don't really experience too much in the life between lives, but they feel in a place of absolute love. And they don't really talk about touch, feel, or sight, because that's seen more of bodily function to someone than actually being in the life between lives. But other books, other hypnotherapists, and other research may well tell you different from that. So I hope that you found, because I've been speaking for 45 minutes and there will be questions and answers. And if what I said at any point you'd like more clarification on, please let me know. I always like to finish off my talks by saying that the past is history, the future is mystery, and the present is a gift. And I just sort of realized that I was going to just say a little bit about this slide as well to begin with, and that's Charlie Bucket. This was created by Charles Schwartz, and he was someone who's created this beloved cartoon, and he always thought of himself as being the underdog and someone who didn't fit in. And I found out that when I was at school and I wanted to make people do silly things, that people have later on said to me that, you know, they've always kind of felt when they were at school that they weren't good enough. So I think everybody is good enough, and I think it's good to be truthful to yourself and not to be scared of being vulnerable, because people so identify with this wonderful cartoon, which is still loved today. So thank you for that, and I hope you found that of some interest.
Thank you so much. So, Paul, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The paranormal, was that an interest to you first of all, or was hypnotherapy and hypnosis?
The paranormal, I would say that was the most got me into it to begin with. I always loved ghost stories. I picked up basically the children's books of ghost hunting that could be available in many of the different shops. So that certainly came first, but it was the program Strange But True that truly got me into the past life side of things. I wouldn't say I loved past lives more than the other paranormal, but it was that seed. I got into doing hypnosis and something called NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, from my dad becoming unwell and himself using a lot of self-help tools to sort of help him through a very stressful situation, and listening to hypnosis discs as well, because he knew I liked the Paul McKenna things. So I think from that point onwards, I thought, you know, this is kind of what I want to do, is to give people joy, whatever their life experience is throwing towards them. And when I learned the hypnosis in the hypnotherapy course I was taking, past lives were a part of that. Again, talking like I do, it's an option if it feels right for the person. And when I was on a paranormal investigation, I recently got my certificate, and I said, would a few volunteers like to have a past life? Because at that point, I hadn't got clients. I just wanted to practice the tools, and people became very interested, and it kind of just snowballed from that moment onwards.
So, for people who don't understand how you become qualified, how long would you expect to train to be a hypnotherapist?
Ask any hypnotherapist, you probably will get 100 different answers, like a lot of things. I first of all started in NLP. That was a long training, about 8 months, one weekend, and then another course, 10 months, one weekend, like 4 weekends, and I've done extra training. The hypnotherapy training that I did was a 4 day intensive. If I hadn't done the NLP stuff as well, which also had a lot of hypnosis, I would have probably also gone down maybe a different route. Also did another weekend past life regression training as well. You have each different qualification group you speak to have different thoughts. Some say you should have so many hours of like 100 hours of hypnosis training to qualify. Others saying, well, a lot of that is just the theory side of it. You don't get the practical. We'll send you the books in advance. But I think the most important thing is that do a few different things. So NLP was my other subject that I looked into and loved very much. That explains a lot of healing process. So I kind of feel that if you do hypnotherapy, I would say have some other tool. Doesn't have to be NLP. Could be counseling, could be CBT, which is very popular. But I think it's very important when you've got someone in hypnosis is that you've got a load of different techniques that you can use should anybody have something which is called an abreaction. So that is the experience of emotion through either trauma or suggestion as if it's happening to you at this moment. And it's important that the therapist knows how to deal with that when it comes up, because it does come up from time to time. But every time it has come up, I've been able to deal with it successfully, and the client has been happy that they've had the experience. They've also felt it like a good release, and it's been beneficial to them. I think if you didn't have all the other training from the NLP, whatever it is, somebody who might have just done an online course for a weekend might suddenly panic over that sort of thing. I'm not saying don't do the online ones, but I would say use it as, are you really interested in taking the subject seriously?
Thank you. Thanks for that. So, Bill, if you'd like to ask Paul the questions, I'd really appreciate that, please, if you could.
Yes, certainly. So the first question is, what percentage of regressions have an alien connection?
Right. Okay. Well, for me, I've had, is it 4 or 5? I think it's 4. So it is 4. I don't usually advertise it. I've just had some people that will come to me because they hear that I do the regressions. A lot of my work is the usual: quit smoking, losing weight, gaining confidence, self-esteem, etc., those sorts of things. But I have had 4 people that have come for alien stuff. Only one person that I've had for the alien stuff. Well, actually, I tell her, well, it's not a lie, but I tell us like one kind of felt they were on a table and they could see some lights. That was all they experienced. Somebody else felt themselves rising up but weren't taken aboard the craft. Other people have had 2 experiences where they've just seen what they said they saw in a lot more detail. Again, where it's important when you say to somebody any sorts of regression, like if it's alien, past lives, or regression in this life, is that the subconscious mind holds the information, but you can never have it as a truth drug. So I always present it, say, we'll explore this. I won't lead, but you can't say that what you experience in this is absolutely accurate. And you have to ethically say that to someone who is having a regression, particularly if it's something like an alien thing. And I sort of say, are you happy to go ahead with those, knowing that there's no way of saying that if this real or not? And the people that I've done have been been happy, but I've certainly made sure that I make sure I don't lead. And I think that's potentially why the alien ones I've had haven't really had the full blown alien abduction that so many people have. I'm not saying that other people that have got the alien abduction experiences have been leading. I know certain people have led, as with the Roy Hunter experience, but I like to minimize that as much as possible. So for me, not that many, but I know others that do quite a lot more.
Okay. So the next question is, do you tend to have a lot of famous people pop up in regressions? In other words, if someone's gone back to a past life, do any of them think they're a famous person in the past?
No, I've had people with very interesting past lives, people that have been quite high up in the military, but no one that yet has come across and said that they were a famous person. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of regressions. And I think why there is the thought that a lot of people are always somebody famous is that's what makes the news. If somebody says, I was a chimney sweep in London in a past life, it'll be like, yeah, whatever. If someone says, the one that people often use is, I was Cleopatra, that tends to go, people think that one, or I was like a film star. That would get somebody thinking, oh, that's really interesting, and it will go in one of the papers and then go forward. But that's why people always tend to get the famous people that are in the news, but a lot of them is just everyday, normal lives like me and you.
Yeah. Okay.